Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that every dollar you had saved for retirement, every dollar you had set aside for your children's education, every dollar you trusted to a man who promised you safety and steady returns, was gone. Not lost. Not invested poorly. Stolen. Deliberately, methodically, and with an enormous smile on his face. That is what happened to more than 20,000 people across the United States, Latin America, and beyond. And the man responsible was not hiding in the shadows. He was on magazine covers. He was shaking hands with presidents. He was knighted by the government of Antigua. He called himself Sir Alan Stanford, and for nearly 2 decades, he convinced the world he was the next great American financial genius. He was not. He was a fraudster. A con man from a small Texas town who built a fictional empire on a Caribbean island, stole $7 billion from ordinary people, and managed to fool regulators, politicians, celebrities, and the entire financial press for years. This is the story of how he did it, why it worked for so long, and how the whole thing came crashing down in spectacular fashion. Alan Stanford was born in 1950 in Mexia, Texas, a small town about 90 miles south of Dallas. He grew up with very little, but he had something that would serve him far better than any inheritance. He had the ability to make people believe in him. To look someone in the eye and radiate confidence so absolute that doubt simply melted away. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and spoke with the easy authority of a man who had never questioned himself in his life. His early business ventures were not exactly impressive. He tried real estate in Texas during the 1980s and the market collapsed around him. He was broke, in debt, and by most accounts, finished. But Stanford did not see failure the way most people do. He saw it as a temporary inconvenience, a problem that could be solved with enough nerve and enough of other people's money. In 1985 he moved to the tiny Caribbean island nation of Antigua and Barbuda. He took over a small bank that his father had connections to, renamed it Stanford International Bank, and began building what he would eventually sell to the world as a financial fortress. The pitch was simple and seductive. Investors could deposit their money in certificates of deposit at Stanford's bank and receive returns that were consistently higher than anything available at American banks. While normal CDS were paying 3 or 4%, Stanford was offering 8, 9, sometimes 10% guaranteed returns. Safe. Stable. Better than the market. To anyone with even a passing understanding of finance, those numbers should have triggered immediate alarm. There is no magic formula that generates consistent double-digit returns with no risk. That is not how investing works. That is not how anything works. But Stanford had answers for every skeptic. He claimed his team of secret analysts employed a proprietary investment strategy so sophisticated that it could not be disclosed to investors or regulators without compromising its competitive advantage. In other words, trust me. And people did. By the thousands. Stanford leaned into the image of Caribbean exclusivity, of offshore mystery, of a brilliant maverick operating outside the stodgy limitations of Wall Street. He sponsored cricket tournaments. He became a figure of enormous prestige in Antigua, eventually receiving a knighthood from the Antiguan government. He hired lobbyists in Washington. He donated generously to political campaigns on both sides of the aisle, spreading money across the political spectrum so that no matter which party held power, he had a friend at the table. The man was not just building a fraud. He was building an ecosystem designed to protect the fraud. Every powerful ally was another layer of insulation between Alan Stanford and the truth. He expanded aggressively. Stanford Financial Group grew to encompass operations across the United States, Latin America, Mexico, Venezuela, and beyond. He targeted Spanish-speaking markets with particular intensity, building a devoted client base in Venezuela and Mexico where investors trusted him even more because he had taken the time to cultivate relationships in their communities. He hired thousands of financial advisors and paid them handsomely to recruit new depositors. Those advisors, many of whom had no idea the whole thing was a lie, brought in friends, family members, retirees, small business owners, and working people who just wanted their money to grow safely. Stanford, meanwhile, was living with jaw-dropping extravagance. He owned a fleet of private jets. He owned yachts. He owned a massive estate on Antigua and properties scattered across multiple countries. He threw parties that celebrities attended. He dressed immaculately and spoke constantly about his vision of building something that would outlast him, a legacy of financial excellence that would serve future generations. It was all fiction. The investment returns were fabricated. The sophisticated analysts did not exist in any meaningful way. The money was not being invested wisely. It was being shuffled around to pay existing investors their promised returns, and enormous amounts of it were being funneled directly to Stanford himself to fund his lifestyle. This is the fundamental mechanics of a Ponzi scheme. New money pays old money. The whole thing keeps running as long as new deposits keep flowing in. The moment they stop, it collapses. The Securities and Exchange Commission had actually been looking at Stanford since the late 1990s. Investigators raised red flags as early as 1997, noting that the returns were implausible and that the bank's operations were opaque in ways that legitimate financial institutions simply are not. But nothing happened. The investigation stalled. It was reopened, then stalled again. Stanford continued to grow and continued to charm his way through every obstacle. This regulatory failure has been one of the most painful and frequently discussed aspects of the Stanford case. The SEC's own Inspector General later produced a scathing report examining why the agency had failed to act for more than a decade despite repeated internal concerns. The answer pointed to a combination of bureaucratic dysfunction, an inexperienced enforcement staff, and what some described as institutional intimidation in the face of Stanford's political connections and aggressive legal team. While the SEC hesitated, Stanford got bigger. He made himself nearly untouchable through sheer accumulation of influence and credibility. He became one of the most prominent financial figures in the Caribbean basin. He staged a famous cricket match in front of a packed stadium in the West Indies with a briefcase containing $100 million in cash sitting in the middle of the field as a prize for the winning team. The image beamed around the world. Here was a man so wealthy, so confident, so real that he could literally bring a suitcase full of cash to a sporting event just to make a point. Then in 2008, the world changed. The global financial crisis hit. Investors everywhere began pulling money out of everything. Ponzi schemes, which depend entirely on the continuous flow of new investment, are uniquely vulnerable to moments of mass panic. Stanford began having serious difficulty meeting redemption requests. The crack in the foundation had appeared. In early 2009, the SEC finally moved. On February 17 of that year, the agency filed charges against Alan Stanford and several associates, alleging a massive ongoing fraud. Federal agents descended on Stanford financial offices across the country. Thousands of employees showed up to work that morning and found federal officials inside their buildings. Stanford himself was not immediately found. He had been on his yacht. He was eventually located in Virginia a few days later, served with papers, and taken into custody. He tried various legal maneuvers. He claimed he was not Alan Stanford, presenting himself to authorities under a slightly different name. He claimed the whole investigation was a misunderstanding. None of it worked. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of what he had done. $7 billion stolen. Not mismanaged. Not lost in bad trades. Stolen. Fabricated investment records. Forged audit reports. Bribed regulators in Antigua who had been paid to look the other way for years. The entire infrastructure of Stanford International Bank had been a theatrical prop, a convincing backdrop for an enormous ongoing theft. For the victims, the devastation was profound and in many cases irreversible. Retirees who had placed their life savings in Stanford CDS lost everything. Latin American investors who had trusted him with money accumulated across lifetimes of work lost everything. Financial advisors who had recommended Stanford to their clients faced destroyed careers and devastating guilt even though many of them had genuinely believed in him. Entire communities that had been built around Stanford's presence in Antigua were economically shattered when the money disappeared. Stanford was convicted in 2012 on 13 of 14 counts of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction. He was sentenced to 110 years in federal prison. He is currently incarcerated and will almost certainly die there. During the trial, he attempted to cast himself as a victim, claiming that he had always intended to make good on his promises and that circumstances beyond his control had caused the collapse. The jury did not believe him. The Stanford case carries lessons that are not comfortable but are necessary. It shows how charisma, generosity with powerful people, and the mere appearance of success can substitute for actual financial legitimacy for years. It shows how regulatory bodies can fail when confronted with targets that have cultivated enough political and social protection. It shows how the promise of safety combined with returns that are just slightly better than average, not outrageously better, just consistently and mysteriously better, can be more seductive than an obvious get-rich-quick scheme precisely because it sounds so reasonable. Alan Stanford told people he would protect them. He told them their money was safe. He told them he was different from the reckless gamblers of Wall Street. He built a brand around trustworthiness and used that brand to steal from the people who trusted him most. The man who wanted to be the next Warren Buffett will spend the rest of his life in a federal prison. And the people who believed in him are still waiting for a fraction of what they lost to come back. Some things, once stolen, cannot be returned. If you want the full story and more dark business secrets, find us on YouTube at Corporate Crypt. The link is in the description. Subscribe so you never miss a story.